My name is Jordan Romansky. I am currently a graduate student at Florida International University. This is a video critique of a research report submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the course EDF 5481, Foundations of Educational Research. So the research article selected was called Comparing a Practice-Based Model with a Research-Based Model of Social Skills Interventions for Children with Autism in Schools. I selected this article because it is very relevant to me currently. I chose this because I currently am a self-contained ESC teacher in Florida for elementary school students ranging from second grade to fifth grade who all have social difficulties. Many of the students in my class either have autism or echolalia, and they really struggle with relating with their typically developing peers. They are immersed with their peers for 20% of the day, but the goal is to immerse them more and do have a more inclusive setting throughout the entire school. Um, these children in my class are often observed in solitary engagement, activities during non-structured times such as recess, lunch, and specials like PE, art, music, etc. A major aspect of teaching these social skills is helping these children to be able to interact with their peers, and it's a crucial skill for them to be able to acquire at a young age in order for them to grow up and be able to independently function as adults and get a job and be able to buy houses and just live and function as an adult. But currently in the state of Florida, teaching social skills to any child in an elementary school setting is not allowed. This creates difficulties when thinking about these children who do have these major social difficulties. I was very interested in researching this topic because this study has three different methods chosen to teach social skills in elementary schools. And so I wanted to see what the best way of implementing and embedding these systems are without having to have an actually approved curriculum to use. So, the context of the research described in the article, the major research problem identified in the study is twofold. One, do adapted social skills programs produce similar social outcomes to that of university developed research programs? And two, if so, do they both improve over usual practice? So the problem was clearly stated in the final paragraph of the introduction. Um, and the three social skills intervention methods that were tested in this study were one, the first was practice based method, which had both adult facilitated and peer mediated interactions. The second method was university research based method, which had a behavioral specialist come in 4 times a week, twice weekly to work with the children with autism, and twice weekly to work with the typically developing peers, teaching them how to interact with these children with ASD. And then the third was considered an inclusion only model in which children were put into general education classrooms. And these children with autism had no additional social skills interventions. And so they were kind of just there. And so the researchers wanted to see the benefits of the three methods and see which method just had the most improvement of social skills. So data was collected using three different methods for these three social interventions. So the first was a friendship survey, which students completed either in groups or individually based on their reading and writing abilities. The second was the coding social network centrality, in which teachers ranked children in four different categories based on where they saw the children interacting. These categories ranged from isolated behaviors to nuclear behaviors. Isolated being the children has very, very little, 20% or less interactions throughout the day, and nuclear being in the top 30%, interacted a lot with their peers and were in a higher social context of their classroom. And then the third and final observation method was called the playground observation of peer engagement, otherwise known as POPE. This was conducted by independent and blinded, non biased researchers who were trained in collection of the data and this was done to ensure that the collection was consistent and that all researchers were looking for similar behaviors and attributes. So, the major findings of this research article. The conclusions that the researchers found was that the researchers may learn from these public school stakeholders who have lived these experiences with these children in their classrooms, and that they can better understand the context of which the implementation occurs, and that the researchers should also partner with these schools to learn about their processes of adaptation and adoption in order to truly facilitate successful implementations of these evidence based practices for children with autism. The researchers concluded this study by stating that interventions designed with implementation in mind may be more feasible and increase the chances of use in these schools. The results indicated that children in the research based model had significantly higher social network centrality than the children in either of the other two models, in the relationship based model and in the inclusion only model. However, the children in the practice based model were less isolated on the playground and had more successful initiations to peers than those in the research based model. And then children with the autism in the inclusion only model did not differ in solitary engagement or in their interactions with either of the other groups due to not having any type of interventions used for them. They had no social skills interventions at all throughout the 6 week research course. But then several implications can be drawn from these mixed results. So, first, while translation of evidence based interventions from research to practice settings is challenging, these data suggest that researchers may learn from public school stakeholders who are able to adapt and use these elements of proven effective interventions to meet the social needs of their students with autism. The researchers found that in many ways, schools using this practice based model were successful with more playground involvement as well as more social interactions, but they may still need some university based research to help refine and implement the integration of students into these social classroom network centralities, because this was found that the university based was higher in that area than the practice based. The researchers do believe that these results are promising as they suggest that schools' attempt to adapt evidence based social skill interventions may be feasible and successful, and that these specific factors leading to student social gains and practice based models are worthy of more rigorous examination. So, these researchers do think that further research should be done and conducted on these children to really truly understand the social complexities of these children with autism and their social skills. So, no study can be perfect. This study did have some critiques that I found, and I will go through those now. So, the first thing that I wanted to critique was the sampling method that the researchers chose. So, with the convenient sampling method, the method of choice, the researchers severely limited the generalization ability of the results. If they were to implement a more random sample, I think a better representation of children with autism could have been found. And the second thing I would change is that I would limit the number of schools and classrooms used in this experiment. I understand that there were 3 models involved and tested, but with the higher number of schools and classrooms, there were 50, that the design and the accuracy of the study was difficult to ensure. There were also about 100 students, all who were in different classrooms with different teachers, and the social constructs and structures of all these classrooms are different, and each teacher makes up the social constructs of the class. So, depending on the teacher, the child's going to have just different experiences. And then the third thing I would change is that I would ensure that the external validity of this study was truly looked at and examined before completing the research. The researchers of this study did look at this, and they saw the complexities of it, and they saw the imperfectionalities of their sample, but they did not do anything to change this. Their sample had 88% males, and 52% of those males were white. So I would do whatever I could to ensure a more accurate representation of the population just to see more so if you would get different results. So then what I would change if I were to do the same study. So there's four things. The first thing is that I would ensure that all observations are held during the exact same time duration. This current study used averages to find a percentage, and some studies had more durations than others based on how long a school's recess or lunch periods were. But I believe that a more accurate representation would have been calculated given the exact same frequency and duration. A second thing that I would change is that I would have a minimum of 3 observations per child, once on the playground, once at lunch, and once in the classroom in order to get a more whole child approach, which would be a better representation of social interactions for an entire day of school. One study method had observations once during recess, and the other study method observed the children twice during either lunch or recess. And then they took averages to ensure that there was validity, but I don't think that validity was 100% due to some children being observed once and some children being observed twice and only in one setting. So if I were to redo this, I would want to do it in multiple settings at least 3 times. The third thing that I would change is that I would ensure that when interviewed for the friendship survey, that each child would be interviewed one on one instead of some in group settings and some individually based on reading and writing difficulties. I think that when in group settings, children will um, sometimes change their answers or um, remain quiet, while the more dominant children state their opinions. The more reserved children will just stay quiet, stay in the background. Sometimes this will formulate new ideas or change their original ideas. So I think that more validity would come from interviewing children one on one to get a more truer and clear opinion of each individual child. And then the final thing that I would add if I were to do this is I would add a fourth measurement tool to see how a child ranks their peer acceptance of themselves. I would be interested to see if a child who ranks themselves lower has less or more social interactions than a child who would rank themselves higher on a social peer acceptance form. And that is the end of my research article.